Hello everyone. During my PhD, my supervisor made a comment that most PhD students drop out during the last phase because it can be very overwhelming to synthesize mountains of information existing and generated during the PhD process. The write-up and the synthesis phase is often the most cognitively and emotionally demanding stage. Today's conversation is to share practical insights from our own experiences around information management, motivation, structure, and resilience to extract 3 to 5 actionable strategies to implement in your own thesis writing process. Before we dive in, a quick introduction. I'm Dr. Anand Bari, founder of Grad Collective and a dissertation coach. I'm joined by Dr. Jessica Strydom. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
She's also a dissertation coach at Grad Collective. Between us, we have worked with over 300 postgraduate students, supporting them from confusion and overwhelm to successful submission through structured coaching and academic editing. We have guided and edited hundreds of theses and dissertation across various principles. Welcome, Jessica. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Thanks for joining us. Perhaps today, Jessica, it could be a lot of revisiting your PhD days.
Yeah.
So Jessica, briefly tell us about your field of study and give us a quick background to your PhD experience.
So my field of study is environmental science, and my PhD was in geochemistry. Basically, I was working on specific isotopes in groundwater and mineral transformation processes. For my PhD, similar to you, I moved abroad. That also brings another aspect of stress to manage, along with the fact that the PhD is already a big project to take on. I took 5 years to complete my PhD, and this is because the first 3 years I was working full-time, and then the last 2 years I actually took on another job and I switched to doing part-time. So the process was a bit longer.
Absolutely. Over 50% of our clients work full-time there.
And about you, give us a quick introduction of your PhD experience.
Sure. I moved into Canada in 2015 to do my PhD. My focus was on the electric vehicle charging systems, and my PhD was on electrical and computer engineering, specializing in electrical power systems. I was full-time student for five and a half years. As a side, I was working as a teaching assistant and doing a bit of volunteering work. But besides, I was totally full-time student for that 5.5 years. Jessica, I'm just curious, when you first began writing the thesis, what did the starting point actually looks like for you? Did you start with a detailed outline or structure things as it emerged? Remember, these were the days where Claude or ChatGPT, none of the AI tools exist.
Yeah, sure. Back in the day, right? I was fortunate to step into a PhD program that was quite structured already. My project was part of a larger group of projects that was focused on a specific topic. And because of that, we had to submit progress reports and presentations every 6 months. This helped a lot to continuously work on the writing and not leave all of it until the end. Looking back, I'm really thankful that it was structured. In the moment, I thought it was excessive and repetitive. Like it felt like a lot of extra work because you had to prepare like a proper, well edited, well formatted document every 6 months. But finally, if I look back now, this is what kind of kept us on schedule, and it was really helpful. But personally, my thought process was a little bit messy. I had this notebook that I just jot down thoughts, ideas, questions. I started from like this notebook. This was my absolute key for the writing process.
I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. Let me ask you this follow-up question. At the beginning of the writing process, what felt overwhelming to you? Like, how did you reduce that feeling? Because it's very common. Like we always hear from our clients and our students that they feel like not knowing where to start, or sometimes you have a lot of information that's just written down. They just feel it's too much in the beginning.
I felt very overwhelmed by the amount of information. The topic I was working on was something that was researched way back, and new technology allowed us to analyze things better. I quite struggled with how to make that make sense. The part that was really difficult for me was to understand why I was researching what I was researching. So the value of what I was doing wasn't clear in my head, and this slowed me down quite a lot. I wasn't part of defining the research question. I stepped into the project that was already defined. So I had to first really dig into understanding the research question and the value, and that took me quite a while. And I felt very overwhelmed. I actually struggled with this question until the very end of writing up my thesis. Yeah, so I think that's super important to figure out the motivation for why you're studying this thing.
Makes sense. Whenever I used to go to my professor and complain that, hey, this is not working, simulation is just acting up, he usually would write on a piece of paper that RE, then he would put a hyphen, then he say research. Means you search again and again. I don't have the answer, you don't have the answer, which is the reason you research, right? And I absolutely love the idea that you've mentioned about the progress reports, because we used to have research group meetings every Friday. So earlier days, I used to show the presentation, and then I just started briefing everything on a document. What it actually helped me with was how much time it has saved to actually put together my final thesis, because I saved a lot of time formatting the diagrams and the images and the tables. We sort of overlook how much time it takes actually to format your final thesis, right? And you won't believe, sometimes writing and connecting the ideas becomes a lot more simple when you have something already written. So yeah, I love that idea, and it looks like there are some similarities with our experience.
I just want to add here, I remember something that was quite valuable for me was, like you said, finally not doing the presentations, but just writing the process on a Word document. I remember it really helped me to just make a diagram saying this thing leads to this thing leads to this. So I had these like little arrows to connect my topics finally, just to really get clarity on the storytelling that's inside writing up the literature and the discussion. Basically making a skeleton and then putting the meat on the skeleton after being clear on the process that I wanted to explain.
Make complete sense. Just want to also ask you a few questions on synthesizing this large amount of information and putting that into a main story or an argument of your thesis, right? So how did you figure out that, like the main story or the argument of your thesis?
This came through a lot of revisions. It's not like you sit down and you know what you want to write. So a lot of going back to a little piece of paper to redefine the structure, because you start out, you know what are the chapters that are supposed to go into the thesis, and then you have to figure out the small parts by, like you said, synthesizing this mountain of information. And this was really just restructuring and restructuring until the story was actually told, until you could draw the line throughout it. So a lot of revision, trial and error.
Makes sense. One of the aspects students struggle with in their academic writing is knowing what not to include in their thesis, right? Like not just for literature review, but also for your entire argument. So were there any results or ideas you intentionally left out? Meaning like you're like, this is the scope, I'm not going to exceed or perhaps cross the boundaries.
Yeah, for sure. This is so relevant and super important. And it's heartbreaking when you've done all of this work and you just want to put in your thesis everything you've done. You want to show the amount of effort that's gone into everything you've done and read, and you want to make it the largest thing possible because you've worked so hard. And your supervisor just crosses out things and say, this is not relevant, leave it out. Part of our thesis required submitting and getting an article published. And this is where I learned so much, because you have to really reduce the amount of information. And then my first attempt failed miserably. It was absolutely denied very quickly because I made this mistake of trying to put everything inside and show all my work instead of just putting the things that were relevant. Finally, what guided me was making sure that every thing connects to the previous thing, and then keeping the thoughts super simple, like one sentence, one thought, and that needs to connect to the next thought. So how I got it down to actually really contain the relevance was just by leaving out everything that didn't connect. It's heartbreaking, but to present something coherent, it's super necessary to cut out the things that are not relevant, no matter how hard you worked on it. Yeah.
That reminds me again of my PhD days, where you want to put everything, but then you hear that feedback or an email where you see a bunch of red lines in your edited file that says remove this, remove this. But then we feel like, well, this is all relevant. How come we know? But then by the time you finish your PhD thesis, it's probably like 400 pages. So, it makes complete sense. And I think that's a skill that you develop maybe in your project report writing or research writing, which I think very beneficial when you get into industry or you choose, being an academician. I think it's one of the most important skills to really understand what goes into a draft for your final report.
Yeah, and I got help actually. I asked my dad to read my chapters. First of all, it was an accountability mechanism so that I kept on writing. And on top of that, someone who is completely outside of the field are able to actually follow what I'm trying to communicate. And if there's too much fluff, he will help me by just making the effort to read through my writing.
Well, absolutely, that can be a colleague, a postdoc
Friend.
fellow that's working in your research team. Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point. I remember I had friends who were good in academic writing. They used to read and share some feedback. The learnings are usually very long term. Like I remember my professor said, when you write your thesis, you never use the word so. Essentially, these things are very valuable in the process of academic writing.
Yeah, I just want to add here basically, monkey see, monkey do. You'll get to what it should sound like just by reading a lot. And back in the day, like you said, we didn't have all these AI tools that were helping us make information shorter. So we actually did read through all of the articles from top to bottom. And I had one thesis example that I actually kind of used to model after. Pick someone's work that you admire, something you think is well written, and model your writing after that. It's, practice makes perfect. You'll see, you'll try, and you'll retry.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Now, when I work with clients, students, I've seen the ones who make progress quite fast are very consistent in their approach, meaning they probably prefer progress over perfection, right? So, what did a typical productive writing day look for you?
Yeah, this is such a good question. Understand how your brain works. So procrastination can creep in so easily, and it can add to the emotional stress that you're living as a PhD because there's so much expectation, a short time frame, a lot that have to get done. So for me, I understood that my brain writes better early in the day, and then like physical things, lab work and things like that, I scheduled in the afternoon so that the mornings, as soon as I arrive, I get the cup of coffee, I sit in front of my computer, and I wouldn't touch my emails until I had writing done for the day. And this is where that notebook came in, where I could pick up the thoughts of yesterday and get some inspiration back from that. So understand how your brain works. That's what I would say.
So, for me, it was slightly different. I've always seen that I start reading literature in the beginning of the day. That probably would have put me into that sort of flow state where I just forget the time and I just keep writing things. Maybe it can also be like I'm changing the computer codes that I'm working on. My writing become better when I actually start my day with reading. And in the afternoon, yeah, it's kind of difficult to focus. So I usually spend time to meet professor, have discussions, just to bring my energy back, or just have a cup of coffee with my research, group. So yeah, I think it's very much person to person, but you probably would need some kind of schedule. Time blocking would be super helpful to make it
Yeah.
productive.
Absolutely. And this should be absolutely tailored to you. Don't try to follow someone else's schedule because you don't function in the same way. So figure out what works for you and commit to that. Yeah. And for me, also working in a shared space, if there's someone productive working next to you, that was very helpful. Like we had office hours, that was something else that really helped, but enforcing credibility in some way by making sure that when you say you're going to write, to make sure you write.
Absolutely, yeah. The other question I had was, were there any techniques that helped you avoid procrastination?
Procrastination, it's always a fight. That was a big problem, and especially when you feel stuck. I think if I look back, it was really important for me to make time away from the project. So I made sure to take all my vacation days. I made sure to make weekends where I'm not working, just so that you give your mind a break and then you can go back with a little bit more motivation. And the other thing was just to take care of health, to eat well, to sleep well. This is obvious, but it's easy to let them go.
Just to build on what you've already mentioned, one of the things that really helped me was to have a Gantt chart. I was actually introduced to this concept of Gantt chart when I did my research proposal for the first. I just loved it because I baked in a cushion in terms of when do I hope to get professor feedback, when do I want to submit my first literature. So it just put me into a red, green, and a number zone by knowing that if I'm hitting the milestones. It was just giving yourself a chance to review your progress, where you wanted to be and where you are at right now. So I think Gantt chart was super helpful, and that's something that I always built with my clients as soon as they come to our coaching programs, because clearly that shows them how realistic it is for them to finish by fall 2026 or summer 2026, and then you sort of reverse engineer from there, right? Sometimes you're able to work on two different tasks in parallel while you wait for the feedback on the first draft. Maybe you can work on the second chapter, which is your second draft. So the Gantt chart is something that was super helpful to get over my procrastination. And there were times where I was progressing really well, which means I did take some time off and relaxed. That's something that I highly recommend. During the final stages, where I've seen often myself struggle a lot with stress, that we want to finish the thesis, but it's not happening because you're just running into several roadblocks. So did you ever feel like this thesis would never be finished?
Quite a couple of times. I came really close to giving up and then questioning why I'm putting myself through this, and like, what is the value? This big question kept coming back to me. Like,
were there any moments you felt a lot of burnout, and question would be like, how do you recover from them?
Yeah, the burnout wasn't necessarily because of work. I think what felt overwhelming was just how to make everything make sense. So that was quite challenging. And the extra load next to that was questioning why I put myself so far away from friends and family. So there was also this part of like managing the emotional load because of moving countries. And I think a lot of PhDs deals with this. Part of like cultural shock. You start out with a lot of enthusiasm in the beginning, and you're super like happy to have this opportunity. And then when it starts to be really difficult and you start to really question, because I was struggling through the PhD process and like the emotional overload of it, I then turned to feeling like I'm despising this opportunity. It was hard. I started to feel like I want to give up, maybe. Then there's this added aspect of guilt. I have this opportunity. I came so far. Now I'm not happy in it. I'm not appreciating it. So what I did to get out of it was to just make sure I really stay connected with important people. Nourish those relationships. Don't forget the people in your life. They will really help you get through it when you feel like by yourself you cannot do it.
There is life outside of your lab and your research. To me, there were a lot of instances where I felt quite burned out. And what really helped at that time was meditation. So I did learn meditation myself, and I used to teach meditation at the university, and then I built family away from home. And that friend circle really grounded during my difficult PhD days. And I tried to make friends who were non-PhDs. So really moving away from that circle of research and publications and citations to having more friends and connections really helped me to reduce my stress and avoid that burnout.
Right.
So now a big part of students' stress indeed come from the feedback that they receive. Could be the supervisor, the committee, right? So in your case, Jessica, how did you manage the process of, let's say, sending chapters to a supervisor or committee members, and then you receive those emails or feedbacks inside, which unfortunately is not very pleasant?
Yeah, that is hard to deal with. I absolutely acknowledge that it's super hard to get those critical feedbacks. For me, it was important to just remind myself that it's not me, it's the work. So first of all, detach from the feedback. Understand that the feedback is on the work and not on you. Secondly, understanding that the way feedback is delivered is often not what you might expect or want or used to, but the way that the feedback is delivered might hurt or sting more compared to the feedback itself. And this is just to keep in mind that everyone is busy with their own problems, has their own struggles. And if someone gives you feedback in a way that you didn't expect, that's not about you, but maybe they are stressed. Maybe they don't have a lot of time. So the feedback is short and sounding unkind. But remember, they have their own stresses. The feedback is actually there to help you improve. So everybody have the same goal in mind in the end. We want to produce the best thesis possible. And so detach yourself from your work. And that helped me to manage feedback better, keeping in mind the feedback is not on me, but the feedback is on my work. And the work is something I can easily change.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. I used to get those emails where the starting of the emails would go something like, this is very frustrating. That would be the start of the email sometimes. My wife would look at my face and she's like, did you get an email from your professor? I'm like, yeah. Like you said, those days I don't think I was that wise to sort of disconnect myself to my work. I felt like I am worthless. But then I think it didn't take me long to figure that out, because as I worked through the comments, it was not that hard. Honestly, what was hard is the acceptance of the situation where, oh, you started self-doubting, you started feeling like you will never get through this. But actually, as you start breaking that down, it started making sense. So when I work with clients, I think both of us, we do that diagnostic process where you're like, okay, you have 20 feedback that you received from your professor. Let's break it down. Not all 20, not all 20 comments are hard. You have one or two that require extensive changes, but rest are not that difficult, right? So it's really about taking some time, gather yourself, look at the comments, go through it, and if you're not sure, please don't assume. Get clarity. Set up a meeting. Maybe send a follow-up email. I know the responses are not fast, but don't assume. Start with things that you know and wait for clarity, right? So always make sure that you gather yourself, accept that they are commenting on your work, not on yourself. So I think that's very valuable what you shared with us
Yeah.
now.
Also, what you're saying about getting clarity, like make sure you walk away with actionable steps from a feedback. So, for example, let's say you did have a supervisor meeting, and a lot was said, and maybe you get so caught up in the emotions, but make sure that you walk away with actionable steps so that you don't end up with a worse draft. And just keep in mind that you are there to learn. And you are learning from an expert. So keep yourself in that mindset. I am learning, and that means I need to adapt and change. And the professor here knows more than me. So for this reason, I listen to what he or she has to say. So that'll help. I mean, this is the scientific method, isn't it? Try something, get feedback, try
True.
again. This is what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to get feedback, have to change your work. If you expect it, then it's easier to digest when it comes.
Yeah, and just know that it's fortunately or unfortunately, it's kind of normal that the feedback that you see, the kind of language that we see, is not always very pleasant. The feedback loop is part of the process. So I want to know the final push, that happened to the submission, right? Where you just feels like, well, this is something. When I was getting married, my father-in-law asked how long it will take you to finish, and then I said 6 months, which I've been telling to every person I've seen since my fourth year. And then I see these same guys the very next year, and they'll be like, this is what you said last year. So with my father-in-law, I think I celebrated my second wedding anniversary and my PhD submission the same time. So it just takes so long. At what point did you decide that the thesis was ready to submit, even if it wasn't perfect?
Yes, like you said, it always takes a lot longer than you think it will take. Like you'd estimate, oh, this is going to take me 6 months turned into 2 years. The same. I thought I'll be done in 6 months because that's why I started a new job already. And then these 6 months turned into 2 years. But at the very end, I think a lot was delayed because now I was doing a full-time job on top of the
Hmm.
PhD. So of course, I have a lot less motivation to work. I'm tired in evenings. Don't always, so I worked less on the PhD, and this dragged it out a lot. But at the very end, basically a month before submission, I went away, went to a little cottage in the mountains. It was nice and secluded, and I basically just wrote for 1 month and finished up everything. So just really sitting down every day and writing and restructuring and editing and doing all the formatting and all of these small things.
Mhm.
And so that was like a month that I gave myself to really finish up, to get it printed, sent, to finish all the admin procedures. So for me to get away from everything and sit down and focus to get to that last little bit. And this was actually really enjoyable because when you do dig in so deep, then things start popping up. And it's really here where I saw a value to what I was doing in this last month.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, yeah, then it became a pleasurable experience.
Yeah, the focused work is very critical, especially when we work with clients who do this part time. It's so difficult. So another
Yeah.
question I usually ask them: do you have any vacations days left? Like you said, perhaps home is not the right place. Could you just, bare minimum, go sit in a library and do this work, or perhaps go for a vacation and just find that sort of mental space. I think there is a lot of distraction when I used to do my PhD. So I think it's so important that they come to that flow state to really sit down and start writing, because once you get into that state, I think it just may become very effortless. So yeah,
Exactly.
I really love that idea of taking a vacation and just go finish your thesis.
Yeah, exactly. No.
Absolutely. Now, some last thoughts on this. Looking back, what specific habits or strategies made the biggest difference in finishing?
I would say this little, I think many people will call it a research journal, but for me, it was just a notebook. It was so useful to be able to page back to original thoughts, to questions that I had, to help me structure the literature. So this thought book was so useful to just keep track of everything and to integrate different things. Like here I had a question 30 pages on, there was the same question, but formulated differently, and then to be able to connect that and take it further. So that was one strategy that I feel like made such a big difference for me. One of my supporting supervisor, I remember walking into his lab office, and he'd been a researcher for many years, and he had this bookshelves with similar looking little black notebooks on it, and he was able to go back years and years with thoughts on his research, and that was very organized, and it looked nice in the same notebook, and that was very impressive. And I thought, what a brilliant way to just keep your head together. So this was one thing that made a very big impact for me to keep everything together. Secondly, I think taking space away from the PhD, to just remember life outside, that was super important, and it really helped me to just take breaks when necessary. And it's okay. You shouldn't feel guilty about it. It's normal to struggle. It's hard to keep focus for so long. It's sometimes emotionally difficult. So don't feel bad about it. It's okay to take breaks and stay connected to life outside of the PhD. And lastly, just be kind to yourself. And I think being able to deal with criticism would be the other thing, because that could be something that makes it a lot harder for yourself. So being able to take the criticism and turn that into something constructive compared to something against you, I think takes a lot of the emotional load off of you that could make life easier as a PhD. But the other thing is to remember that you're the one that decides when is the end, because there will always be more to write. Their research include. You're the one that decides when it's going to be done. You draw the border. You decide, okay, now this is good enough for me to be something that I'm okay with submitting.
Absolutely. Now, building on that, I would add accountability partner. It could be sort of like another researcher in the same group, could be a postdoc, professor, doesn't matter, but someone who could look at your Gantt chart and figure out if you're progressing well or if you're just procrastinating and pretending to be stuck. Another thing is to really find that flow state, what it looks like. For me, it was starting my day with reading literature, ensuring that I don't work on at least Sundays, and ensuring I take vacations as needed. So just make sure like you do have the downtime, because your brain needs it. And eat well, sleep. Just make sure you take care of your mental health, because there is a life outside of your research world. I think it's a lot more about figuring out what works for you and just being open to feedback. This is I think very crucial. And know that you will be able to finish it. It's quite normal that you feel yourself sunk when you're having that first rejection for your research article, or you feels like you have finished 4 years and still have not published the first article. Just work your way through, and if you need some support, you could always reach out to your professor, or you can find an academic coach like ourselves to see or show you the path forward.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts, Jessica?
Accountability partner, absolutely, yes. I 100% agree with this point.
Okay, thank you. All right, so wish you all the very best with your thesis journey. We know it's not the easiest, but know that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. And if you absolutely feel stuck and you feels like you need an accountability partner, a friendly mentor, somebody who just want to read, someone you may want to read your work and give you some feedback, please don't hesitate. You can reach out, book a clarity call with one of us, and we'll be happy to walk you through the process and understand your challenges and get you to the finish line.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Okay, thank you. All the very best. Thanks.